We're joined by Alan Shatter, former Minister for Justice, Equality and Defence, and also by Shinn Fein spokesperson on Foreign Affairs, Matt Carty. Alan Shatter, to you first. Your reaction to the news that two very senior Israeli politicians, including Benjamin Netanyahu, have been that the arrests warrant are being sought by the chief prosecutor.
Let me first of all give my reaction to what the steps taken by the international prosecutor. They've been greeted with a lot of hysteria by different sides. The one thing that it seems Israel and Hamas are agreed on is that they're now criticizing the prosecutor. I think the International Criminal Court has a very important role to play in our international jurisprudence in the protection of human life and humanitarian law. What's interesting is the prosecutor has announced that he's seeking the issuing of 5 different warrants from the International Criminal Court. At the stage the prosecutor is at, the 5 individuals are effectively suspects and no more, and the court has to decide whether to issue arrest warrants. 3 of those for whom arrest warrants are sought are the 3 main leaders of Hamas, 2 located in Gaza, 1 in Qatar, and the crimes that the prosecutor details substantially relate to the atrocities of murder, rape, kidnapping, abduction of hostages, torture that took place on the 7th of October last, and the continuing retention of hostages by Hamas. Yeah. He very specifically details in his statement some of these events, including the dreadful atrocities of 370 young people being slaughtered at the Nova Music Festival. So he says there are reasonable grounds to believe that the 3 named Hamas leaders have committed war crimes, crimes against humanity, and there's very substantial evidence.
And in relation to Israel, though, Alan, can I ask you your reaction?
I'm coming to Israel. Yeah, I'm coming to Israel now because you omitted that when the first question you asked me. In relation to Israel, the focus is on the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, and the allegation relates to the failure of Israel to ensure that adequate aid has been delivered during this awful conflict to the people of Gaza, and the concern that there was a deliberate policy to starve people in Gaza in order to force release of hostages and to force Hamas to end the war. And again, these are very serious allegations, and it's quite clear that under international law, Israel has an obligation to ensure that adequate aid is provided to the population there. What's interesting about the statement issued, whereas the prosecutor goes into substantial detail relating to Hamas, there are 2 or 3 things omitted in relation to the Israeli side, which is addressing the complexities of aid being delivered during a major conflict, the difficulties with regard to ensuring that aid isn't diverted and looted, and there's numerous stories of Hamas diverting looting aid, selling it on the black market, as recently as.
All right, Alan, I've given you plenty of time to answer the question.
You asked me on to talk about the subject. I'm trying to
and if I could ask a question,
and not in sound bites.
I think you've had plenty of time to go well beyond soundbite. Can I ask you specifically in relation to? I mean, people listening this morning will say their argument will be quite clear. They'll say 35,000 people dead, including 7,797 children, I think is the latest figure. They're saying their argument is simple. They'll say by any standards that is a war crime. That is worthy of the International Criminal Court getting involved.
Yeah, except that's not the focus of what's happening here, and it's not. The statistics that you give are now seriously challenged and have been changed and amended. But let's just deal with...
I don't think anyone disputes the tens of thousands of people have died, including many thousands of children.
Yeah. Let's deal with the reality of what's happening here and on the ground. This is a terrible conflict. People have died who should never have died. It was a conflict initiated by Hamas. It continues for 3 very simple reasons. Hamas won't release the hostages. rockets continue to be fired at Israel, even from Rafah during the current conflict that's taking place. And Hamas won't abandon the armed struggle and their genocidal objective to eradicate the Israeli state. That's why we still have conflict. Every single
Nothing to do with
every,
Israel and what Israel have done since?
every single death of any civilian on either side is regrettable. But what you're leaving out of your narrative, as normally
I don't have a narrative. I'm asking questions.
No,
Alan.
as normally happens in these interviews and the questions asked, you make no reference to the fact that that Hamas.
Yeah, Alan, as you know, I have a guest on next who I will be putting those questions to. So I'm asking you in relation to Israel. I'll ask Matt Carty in a second in relation to Palestine. So if you could deal with that issue, that would be.
Yeah. Well, if you'd stop interrupting me, I'd finish what I'm trying to say. I'm pointing out in the context of the terrible deaths in Gaza. No one denies there have been deaths. So there are disputes about statistics. Not interested in statistics. Every death is a person, be it a man, woman, and child, and is to be regretted unless they're a Hamas militant intent on murder and genocide. But the problem in Gaza, as everyone knows, and is regularly ignored in this country, both frankly in interviews and in politics, is that Hamas have an extensive tunnel infrastructure under Gaza. They fire rockets at Israel from adjacent to civilian infrastructure. Terrorists emerge out of hospitals, mosques, and residential areas. And sadly and tragically,
Alan,
this is a very major war.
Chatter.
And in every war, civilian deaths occur.
Alan Chatter, we do have to leave it there. Alan Chatter, former Minister for Justice, thank you for talking to Newstalk Breakfast. Let's bring in Matt Carty, Shinn Fein spokesperson on foreign affairs. Matt, your reaction to Hamas and the accusations of, I suppose, basically murder, extermination, torture, rape and taking hostages?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, Hamas breached international law on October the 7th, and their leaders need to be held accountable for those violations of international law. I also contend that Israel has breached international law every single day since October the 7th and have been in gross violation of international law for several decades.
Okay. Are Hamas guilty? Are Hamas guilty of war crimes, crimes against humanity, do you think?
Yes. And therefore, the ICC, the International Criminal Court, is rightfully, I would say, finally doing its job in seeking to hold those people who have been responsible for international war crimes, whether they be committed by Hamas or in a much more extensive manner by Israel, to be held accountable. I think that is what needs to happen. What we're talking about here, the crimes that have been outlined, particularly against the state of Israel, and there's no distinction in terms of, and I agree with this point, in terms of the killing of innocent civilians and indiscriminate killing of innocent civilians. There is a distinction in terms of the relationship with the parties internationally. So, for example, Hamas doesn't have an embassy in Ireland. Hamas doesn't enjoy the most preferential trade arrangement with of any state outside of Europe with the European Union. Hamas doesn't secure international finance to actually fund its war crimes.
Okay.
Israel does all of those things. And therefore, I think what is really important, what we have been calling for, what people all over the world have been marching for, is for international accountability. We cannot have a situation where...
And it looks like we do have that. Can I ask you a final question, Matt? Is there a question about the government saying they're now going to recognise Palestine as a state? Is there now a question mark over that decision, given that we know Hamas is in government effectively in one part of that state, and that now senior members in Hamas are being accused of war crimes and crimes against humanity? Should the Irish government reconsider its decision on that basis?
No, we should absolutely recognise the state of Palestine. In fact, I would say we should have done it years ago, and had the international community recognised the rights of the Palestinian people to a free and sovereign nation, to uphold the decisions of previous peace agreements, particularly the Oslo Accord.
But Matt, we don't have time to get into the history of it. We are where we are. Should we reconsider on the basis of what the international Criminal Court is now saying?
No, I think what we now have is a need for the international community to ensure that if international law and the UN Charter are to remain have any meaning, then there can be no more equivocation or half-hearted measures. We recognise the state of Israel, and we will continue to do so. If we want a two-state solution, then we have to recognise the other state, which is the state of Palestine, and then we have to actually implement measures, meaningful measures, to ensure that vision of a two-state solution actually becomes a reality.
Even with Hamas, Hamas as key players in that state,
actors will actually retain dominance. What we want is a peaceful, negotiated settlement. That will only happen if all parties are held accountable to international law, and if the international community actually stands up
Carty,
for
we will
the
leave it there.
international law.
Matt Carty, Shinn Fein spokesperson on foreign affairs. Thank you for talking to Newstalk Breakfast.